friends, welcome back. Today I am answering your top birth control questions, so stick around, we're going to cover some good ones. Okay, so on TikTok I put out a call and I said, get me your birth control questions. I want to cover it here on YouTube, not only because I get asked this stuff all the time, but also because Thanks Birth Control Day is coming up on November 18th. That means I'm going to have lots of birth control content here on Instagram and TikTok covering all the myths and getting all the facts straight, because there's lots of myths out there about birth control, in case you haven't noticed. All right, let's jump right in. First question we've got here is all about fertility issues and birth control. I get asked this question every single day, multiple times a day. Doesn't matter how many times I cover it. It's out there. Why? Because it's a super common myth. The good news, there are no studies that show any issues with fertility and birth control. That means if you use birth control for a day, a year, 10 years, 15 years, there is no impact on your long-term ability to get pregnant. I repeat, there is no impact on your fertility. I know I'm being dramatic, but there's a reason. It's because there is so much misinformation out there. Now, it is true that once you're stopping the shot or the Depo-Provera injection for birth control, it can take up to a year for your periods to come back. But that's expected. We know to expect that. That does not affect your ability to get pregnant long term. I think this myth gets fueled because it depends why you started birth control in the first place. If it was because your periods were irregular or you have PCOS and you're using that to regulate your cycles, that's great. But once you stop birth control, you go back to your baseline fertility. So if you're using birth control because you hardly ever got any periods, you might want to talk to your OBGYN sooner rather than later so that you can prepare and know what you might need to do in terms of testing or workup down the line when you do want to become pregnant. Oh, and as always, references and resources down in the show notes. You know I got them there. Next question, weight gain and birth control. I got asked this one a lot, so I'm going to cover it. The good news, the only birth control that has been linked with any kind of weight gain is the Depo-Provera shot. I know, it seems hard to believe because you've heard everyone and their mother say that they gained weight once starting birth control. Let's talk about it. So it is true that you can gain weight when you use the shot. About 1 in 4 women will experience weight gain. That means 3 in 4 women don't. They usually gain about 5% of their body weight in the first 6 months of use. So that means if you're using Depo and it's past 6 months and you haven't seen weight gain, you might just be okay. Here's why birth control sometimes gets a bad rap when it comes to weight gain. The average person gains about ½ pound to 1.5 pounds every year. So you can imagine if you've been on birth control for 10 years and then you come off of it and you've got that extra weight, I can see why you might say it's your birth control. The studies just don't support that. That doesn't mean I'm not going to listen to you when you tell me that you've gained 10 pounds since starting the pill. I completely understand that everybody's different. And even though we might not have the science to prove it, if you think the pill or if you think the shot or the patch or whatever is a reason that you've gained weight, I hear you. And if it means that you might need to switch up to a different pill or try something else, that's totally fine. But let's make sure we also look at the big picture too in terms of activity, food choices. Are there any other conditions that could be going on like thyroid disorders or anything of that nature? So if you are worried about your weight gain and you're on birth control, let us know. However, the thing about weight gain is that if it's the reason that you're not going on birth control, I want you to be assured by the data, or rather the lack thereof, that birth control causes weight gain. There are many people out there who would use birth control, but because of the fear of weight gain, they don't want to. And then what happens? They get pregnant, which is associated with a lot more weight gain. So if you have concerns about weight gain and going into birth control, let your doctor or your provider know, and we can help figure out what's the best method for you. Okay, here's another question about bleeding on the Nexplanon. That's the arm implant that's good for 3 to 5 years, and that's another question we'll get to. Here's the thing. Bleeding, unscheduled bleeding, that's a technical term for it, or spotting or bleeding here and there, or kind of irregular bleeding, that's a known side effect of the Nexplanon or the arm implant. And the kind of sucky thing is that it doesn't get better. Whereas we do see that with IUDs, it tends to get better over time. With the Nexplanon, it doesn't. And it's one of the main reasons that people will discontinue it or will not choose it as a method again after it's removed. Again, this does not apply to everybody. And if you feel that this birth control method is right for you, go ahead and give it a try. And if you are having some unscheduled bleeding or spotting on the Nexplanon, let your provider know. We've got some things that we can try, like using a short-term burst of birth control pills to try to stabilize that bleeding, or even things like ibuprofen. So just let us know. This is a great question. Nexplanon use. Can I use it for 3 years or 5 years? I've seen, the website says 3 years. I've seen other people say 5 years. What is real? So in the United States, it's FDA approved for 3 years. And when you look at the Nexplanon website, it says that it needs to be removed after 3 years. And yet, studies have shown that it's just as effective up to 5 years. In fact, places outside the United States routinely use it for up to 5 years. So can you leave yours in for up to 5 years? Well, I am not giving specific medical advice. I never will here. But I will tell you that it is an option to leave it up to 5 years. But if your provider does that, he or she will likely document in your chart that you have chosen to leave it in longer than what the FDA recommends, and that is your personal choice. That said, if something works for 2 extra years and it's not FDA approved and yet there's no downside of it, I mean, come on. I get this question a lot. What's the best form of birth control? Now, what are you asking? Are you asking about what's the most effective form of birth control? Because we definitely have data on that, and you can see here from this table what that would be. So it's permanent sterilization, so getting your tubes tied or a vasectomy, or other reversible methods like the IUD or the Nexplanon, the arm implant. Those are fantastic reversible forms of birth control. But it's not always just about how good it works. For you, the best form of birth control might be a pill because you really like having that scheduled bleed. For other people, it might be a progesterone IUD because they don't want a period. It depends about what your priorities are and what's best for you. And I dive into that more on my Instagram and also my first YouTube video up here. So you can click on that and you can get into more about what I consider the best form of birth control is and what you should take into consideration when you're choosing yours. I saw this question a bunch of times too. I want to use birth control, but I'm scared about all the side effects. What should I do? And I covered this in an Instagram post where I highlighted a whole bunch of side effects that you can see are associated with birth control. Got them right here. And then I went on to the next slide and I showed all the side effects that are associated with pregnancy. And I highlighted them here. And they're the same. It's not useful to say, what are the side effects? Instead, it's useful to think about how common are these side effects? How life-threatening are these side effects, and how acceptable are they to me? For example, some people will absolutely not tolerate any breakthrough bleeding, which is like spotting when it's not on your period. That's a side effect they will not tolerate. That helps guide me into what's the best birth control for them. If that's not a side effect that really bothers you, that's okay. That's not something that you mind. So when you talk about side effects, the things that I think most people are talking about are things like weight gain, mood changes, maybe libido changes, and then the life-threatening side effects like blood clots, strokes, heart attacks. Maybe they're talking about bone loss. And these are all great things that we should dive into. So when you say to me, well, I'm really worried about the side effects, the next question that your doctor should say are, what side effects worry you? And then we can dive into how common they are, how frequent they are with the different kinds of birth control, and help you find a method that makes you feel like you've got the best birth control coverage you want, or the best period control that you want, with the least risk of the side effects that you have decided you do not want to experience. Again, check my show notes, my references, my resources. This is on my Instagram. I've got a highlight topic for birth control where I've put all of these really useful topics, so I hope that you'll check that out. I get this question a lot too. What about the time limit for how long you can use depo for? So much so that I covered it in one of my side effects series that I've started on Instagram to talk just about birth control side effects. And you can see here that the World Health Organization says that there is no time limit, that there should not be a time limit placed on how long somebody can use depo, because it can be a really good form of birth control that you only have to get once every 3 months, and it can be very private. Nobody has to know that you're on it. And while there is the side effect that some people have had their depo taken away from them, meaning they were told after a certain number of years you can't use it anymore, that bone loss side effect, also known as osteoporosis, we know that once you stop using depo, that bone loss can come back. And again, in this side effects series, I go through a whole lot about what this bone loss is, how to minimize it, and if you've been told that you need to stop depo, just some information and some references and resources so that you can inform yourself and maybe discuss it with your provider so that you can use the birth control that you feel is right for you. This was a really good question. It said, I wish you would talk more about natural family planning or fertility awareness method. And this person mentions the Natural Cycles app. And I think it's great. And I do cover fertility awareness methods both on my Instagram and on TikTok. And I think it's important to discuss because for some people, this is the best form of birth control for them. So specifically, Natural Cycles is an app that is FDA cleared, not approved, but cleared for birth control. And what it is it's an app combined with their thermometer. And so you check your thermometer every morning before you get out of bed. That's called a basal body temperature. And we know that your temperature changes, as you can see in this graph here, right before ovulation. So you can know when you're more likely to get pregnant and less likely to get pregnant. And on the days that you're more likely to get pregnant, you don't have sex. This app costs $79 a year, and it includes access to the app as well as their thermometer. And I think it's a totally reasonable form of birth control to use if you are dedicated to not having sex when you're not supposed to get pregnant, and you accept the chance that you may become pregnant. Depending on how well you use it, risk of pregnancy is anywhere between about 2 and 25%. Fertility awareness methods, including using this Natural Cycles app, can only be used if your cycles are regular. That means in the first few years after starting your period when you're a teenager, this is not a good method for you because you don't ovulate at a reliable time. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, as you're getting closer to menopause, this is not a reliable form of birth control because, again, ovulation gets a little wacky as you get closer to menopause. If you've just had a baby too, this is not a reliable form of birth control, nor is it if you're just coming off of hormonal birth control because your cycles haven't regulated quite yet. In addition to using something like the Natural Cycles app, you can also combine testing your cervical mucus, cervical position, which changes throughout your cycle, which can be a bit tricky to understand. Combining all of these things together, you can potentially find a form of birth control, but it requires dedication, and I really encourage you to review it with your provider just to make sure that you're a correct candidate for it and that it's the best form of birth control for you. You guys, I got so many questions about birth control. This is barely scratching the surface. So for sure, more of these question and answer YouTubes will be coming. In fact, I'm thinking of devoting separate YouTubes to each form of birth control because I think they deserve it and I think the need is out there for accurate, reliable information. As always, follow me on TikTok and Instagram, Dr. Jennifer Lincoln. I want you to subscribe, like, hit the notifications button so you know every time a new YouTube is posted, and drop any comments or questions in the questions section. I love hearing what you're thinking, what you want to know more about, and do not forget to check out the resources that I link here. One of them is bedsider.org, which is one of my absolute favorite websites. They break down birth control in an amazing way, visually very easy to understand. You can combine methods, you can get real stories from people who really use the birth control. I think it's phenomenal. So thank you so much for sticking around and stay tuned for future YouTubes.